I'm Chelsea Mauldin, and I am going to talk to you not at all today about corporate processes. I'll talk to you instead about trying to do the service design work that we've all been talking about here, but in the context of the public interest and the public good. So I'm the director of a not-for-profit. We were founded in 2011, and our mission is to improve the design and the delivery of public services. And our entire focus is on services that are delivered for poor people and additionally vulnerable populations. So we work with seniors or children or veterans, for example. All of that work is done in partnership with government agencies. And that's because we want the ability to have the designs that we create really scale to a large number of people as quickly as possible, because we feel that there's a kind of an urgency to the work that we're doing. So we don't work with, say, a community service organization unless we have a public sector partner also on board. We provide strategic assistance to federal agencies. We work with municipal organizations as well, usually innovation teams within mayor's offices. We provide assistance to various kinds of innovation advocates who are working in the public sector space, philanthropies, et cetera. But most importantly, we do service design with the citizens of New York City and with New York City municipal agencies. So what we do is something like this, and probably a lot of you have some kind of diagram that may look similar, where there are multiple phases of work, beginning with discovery, which for us is very much about ethnography, and ethnography in a 360-degree way. Moving on to design, which is always collaborative design with end users, meaning members of the public, and also service providers, as well as policymakers. And then finally doing piloting and evaluation, because the public sector typically does not pilot. Pretty much universally, public services are invented and they are deployed. I had the very interesting experience of working on a large project for Medicare several years ago, where it went from our machines to 37 million people with no piloting in between. So let me just ask, actually, is anyone here from government? 2 government people there, good, okay. But that tells you something. Here we are at a premier service design conference, and there's no representation by the public sector. And that's because service design really doesn't exist to a large degree in government in the United States. Obviously, things are different in Europe. So let me show you a little bit of a case study about what our work looks like doing this with a large New York City agency. So several years ago, we formed a partnership with the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, which is one of New York City's 2 affordable housing agencies. There's NYCHA, which sort of owns and runs like the big housing projects. That's what you might think of as affordable housing. But the kind of current model for affordable housing is really about a partnership with private sector developers who build a big building, and they agree to set aside a certain number of units for lower middle income people. And in that case, the agency really functions more as a regulator than they do as a service provider, although they are fundamentally engaged in providing a service. This partnership was also done with a research lab at Parsons, the New School for Design, the DESIS lab, and was generously supported by the Rockefeller Foundation. I always have to say that. So we did a discovery process and ended up, the first challenge, honestly, was convincing the agency that they were a service provider. We said, who are your users? And they said, units. We said, units? They said, units of housing. That's what we do. We make housing units. And no shame on them. I mean, that literally is their job. Their job is to create and preserve affordable housing units. But the agency did not have traditionally a focus on thinking about the human experiences of the humans who were living in those units. So we said, let's talk about what you do that is a service. And just identified 6 or 7 different areas where we felt that they were service providers. And the one that we ended up selecting for the design phase of this project was around what's called lottery and lease-up. So if you are applying for an affordable housing unit in New York City, you enter what is euphemistically referred to as a housing lottery. Again, for the Europeans in the room, I know this is shocking, but we distribute our affordable housing by lottery. We think that's fair. And that lottery process attracts hundreds of thousands of applicants because New York City is a very expensive place to live. Unfortunately, many hundreds of thousands of people who apply are not actually eligible. So this is obviously a huge problem for those users, those residents who are applying for housing that they will never be able to receive. It's also a big problem for the agency because it means that they're trying to deliver a service, but it's not getting to the right people in some ways. So we began to ask the question, how can we better make this connection between what the agency's mandate is and what the residents of the city need? After doing discovery, we identified 4 critical kind of design challenges in this process. First was about the process of documenting your income. There was the process itself, all the many steps you were going to have to go through to apply and be screened. There was this question of unnetworked people, people who needed this information about affordable housing, but weren't reachable through the kind of communication channels that currently exist. And then there was a further issue around the mismatch between the nature of the units that were offered and the people who were applying for them, in that there were people who were actually should have been applying but who weren't because they didn't perceive themselves as being the appropriate target for affordable housing. We did a wide range of co-design exercises with members of the community and with service providers. Our primary focus area was the South Bronx, which, as you know, large percentages of it burned to the ground in the 70s and 80s, and so there's been a huge reinvestment. Billions of dollars have been spent building new housing in the South Bronx. So we worked with a community organization there, met extensively with residents there, also Central Brooklyn, also Chinatown, really working with both community members and community service providers. Also, we spent quite a bit of time talking to housing developers because they're the ones who are going to have to implement a lot of this work on the ground. And ended up developing 4 separate proposals for the agency around the provision of better access to the affordable housing application. So the first of those was about saying, you need to actually provide better information to people, actually creating better information tools to help people understand the various steps of the process. So from the listing, where people first find out about affordable housing, through a kind of quick start guide to understanding the process, through detailed information on what's going to happen if you are selected for screening. A large percentage of the people who they're trying to reach with these programs are low literacy both in English and in their native language, have no broadband connectivity. So the question really becomes, how do you push this information into the communities where the information is most needed? So more important even than the communications tools themselves were these community-based strategies for creating these kind of knowledge-sharing networks. And the goal there was not merely to create kind of one-way channels through which we could push information, but begin to create networks of neighborhood knowledge about what the affordable housing process is so that it can begin to spread horizontally without it having to be instigated necessarily by the agency. So one of those was around hyperlocal marketing, a way for housing developers to actually push information into communities on a more local level in places of daily life. Another was about supporting community-based organizations who were already doing work around affordable housing in agencies but had no connection to the agency itself. And then finally, there was a goal of making it so this agency, which didn't have a lot of kind of person-to-person contact with their end users, actually had a quick and relatively easy way of going out and talking to community members and getting feedback from them. That's Emily. She works at HPD. She's a beautiful person on the inside and out. This is her Gantt chart. I feel like this Gantt chart was like the high point of this project for me in a lot of ways. Because there is the point where we design, but we have to hand over the work to the agency to implement it. And when she showed me her Gantt chart, which she probably had no idea I was going to start taking around to conferences, I thought, okay, that's it. They've adopted it. These designs are now a thing which have been integrated into their work stream and their culture. And that felt like a huge success in terms of this way of working, which was not typical for the agency, really beginning to kind of enter into the agency's DNA. This agency, by the way, which I believe did not have a licensed copy of Adobe Creative Suite in the entire agency when we began working there, has recently advertised for an experienced designer. So there's a real kind of transformation in their understanding of what design can do for them. So they really had the responsibility of piloting these 4 prototypes, which they did. And we really, at that point, our job became trackers and evaluators. So we were able to observe the distribution digitally of the various informational tools. We were also able to do a kind of intercept survey. So over about a 6-week period, there were something like 250,000 people who applied for affordable housing. We were able to get 1% of those people to respond to a survey, talking to us about their experience and their use of these tools. We also did much more kind of high-touch evaluation things where we did observations and shadowing, had people fill out little postcard surveys as they were interacting with various pilots, all of which was to really see, okay, here's the theory of change that we developed early on in this process. Did we meet our actual objectives and goals? And I'm showing you this, which I don't think is probably a thing that most of you are making in your corporate lives, because we have to really prove the value of design to the public sector. We really have to be able to say, this is not some kind of like crazy creative process that you should distrust, but rather a way of actually inventing tangible solutions. And that has to do with being able to say explicitly at the outset, here's what our goals and objectives are, and then being able to report back to the agency about whether or not we met those goals and objectives. And that's really not about, I mean, metrics are great, but it's also really about a qualitative assessment of people's experience and being able to make a good case for a more qualitative understanding of value. All of this information is available in books. These are on our website. The original document describes the discovery and design process, and we'll actually be releasing the complete evaluation of this project next Thursday, so you can download it. So that's part 1 of my talk. Part 2 really is about the mysteries that remain, having done this work and similar work now for 5 or 6 years. The first really has to do with the bureaucracy. How, as a designer, how do we respond to the needs and requirements of our partners, which are large bureaucratic institutions? And I don't mean that in the, oh, the red tape, it's so terrible. I mean that this is a particular sort of thing, a government entity created by a late capitalist democracy. You know, there is the service itself, which we are charged with designing. And that service exists because the agency has a mandate. And the mandate is to serve the public good. Their mandate is not to make money. There's no money to be made. It is not to attract customers. If anything, the desire is for there to be fewer customers for the social service. Not because we want to kick people off, but because ideally more people would be living better lives. That public mandate, which is funded with public money, the taxes that we all pay, the taxes which we could say are extracted from us, there's a higher burden on the public agency because they are operating in the public interest with the public's money. Because of that, the nature of the institution is very particular. There are a lot of rules about how government agencies work which derive directly from that public mandate and from that use of public money. It's not appropriate for, somebody to hire their cousin Betty, no matter how great she is, because they need to operate with a higher level of transparency, or at least a higher level of justifiability. What happens in an institution that has that kind of additional burden on them, or that additional set of restrictions and requirements around their operations is that a very particular kind of culture emerges. And I think it is safe to say that that culture is risk averse. It's not appropriate for government agencies to take risks. Because one, they're not supposed to be wasting our money. And two, if they mess stuff up, people might die. So how do you go to them and say, as a designer, we're here to take risks and invent new things? There's also complexity. The nature of public service delivery is a level of complexity beyond anything else that I've ever experienced in terms of the heterogeneity of individual humans who are being served, in terms of the incredible numbers of different service providers, in terms of the size and complexity of the organizations which are delivering the service, in terms of the social issues which underpin the need for the service at all. And there is, of course, human need, and that's why all of this is happening. So these numbers are here to remind me to get my figures right. So 24 is $24,000. That's the poverty line in the United States for a family of 4. You are not poor unless you are living on less than $24,000. You and your 3 other family members, which seems kind of impossible, right? Except 1.7 million people in New York City do that. 20% of the population of New York City is living in a household below the poverty line. 1/3 of the children in New York City are living in households below the poverty line. So there's an incredible urgency, I would argue, to being able to solve some of these questions. And this is not just New York City. 54% of the population of the United States will experience 1 year or more living below the poverty line during their adult lifetime. Half of the children in America will live in a household that at one point or another uses food stamps. So this is not just an urban problem, it's actually a national problem. So what are we as designers with our Legos? Those are my Legos in my office. What are we doing about these challenges with our Legos? Where do we position ourselves and our value and our offering? I mean, I think that most of the people now who are in the public sector who are interested in talking to people like me and my team know that there is more that we can do for them than decoration. That the value of a designer goes beyond aesthetics and creating a kind of aesthetic sheen. But I don't know that we're to the point yet where the idea that designers can be inventors is really something that's comfortable. I think there's also this question of, even if you get to the idea that designers can be inventors of new things, what it is that we are inventing is not yet determined. Are we inventing objects? By which I mean knowable things, a digital object, not just a tangible object. Or are we inventing new futures? Are we trying to actually come up with futures where the service that we're designing maybe isn't necessary? And that speaks to whether or not we are actually designing services. A lot of the people who I know who do the same kind of work that I do, particularly in Europe, are actually moving away from the design of services. They're saying, it's too late. By the time I'm coming in to design a public service, I should have been sitting in the room where the policymakers made a set of decisions about what the service should be. And so there's a movement actually away from service design to the design of policy and the application of design approaches to policymaking. Now, I kind of want it both ways, because I feel like I can spend the whole day sitting around the room with a bunch of other people with graduate degrees and, Apple products, or I can actually be working with people who are using and experiencing the services as they are being delivered. And I don't want to get too far away from that, because I think that that's where the real thing is. So, given that those are the mysteries, what are the strategies? I've got 3 for you. Some of these I think we're employing relatively well, some not so much. And I want to distinguish between these strategies and tactics. We've talked a lot here about service blueprinting and journey mapping, all absolutely crucial methods to be applied during the work. But I want to talk, maybe, if you'll let me use the word meta, about a kind of meta level of how you think about the work and engage in what the problem is. So I would say the first thing has to do with owning the constraints. This door is the door to the Social Security office in downtown Brooklyn. And on my team, this is known as the door of no. No cell phones, no drinks, no chatting, no humanity, please, here at the Social Security office. None of that. But you can't fight against that. Like, as a designer, the constraints that come with these things, the nature of the service, the public mandate, the bureaucratic institution, the culture of fear inside of the organization, those things are your brief. You have to own them. You have to stop resisting them. And you have to say, that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to design for that. I think the next strategy is, you've heard this phrase, squaring the circle, which means taking on the impossible task, doing the thing that the mathematicians have said cannot be done. I want to say that you also, I think, need to circle the square. So go with me here. I'm sorry about this metaphor, but I kind of like it. It's like there is an expectation now, at least, that various people who own aspects of a service should get together and talk to each other. And we require, in fact, that all of our projects build off of ethnography with users. We require that our public sector partners embed public servants in our design teams. We won't do the work as consultants. You have to actually give us your staff, and the staff has to come and hang out in our office in Dumbo and eat cookies and stare at the whiteboard wall. Like, that has to be part of the process, because there has to be that kind of integration. But that's a lot of dualities, like us and the users, us and the policymakers. And what we really actually need is just as we try to develop 360-degree understandings of the service, we need a much rounder kind of a team, where everyone is actually working with everyone all the time. Because again, this is a public service. We're not just doing this for the public, we need to be doing it with the public. This is a picture I actually took in Toronto at a drop-in center for heroin addicts. And the woman there in the leggings with the big purse is a lovely person named Sarah Schulman, who owns a firm called In With Forward. And Sarah has been doing public sector work for, 5-10 years. And she actually has said, I'm not going to do this anymore without a deep knowledge of what the service is. So she just finished living for 12 weeks in a public housing project in Vancouver. And I think that, I don't know that we can all go there. I don't know that we all have the capacity to actually go and live in the places where we are attempting to design and deliver services. But I think there's something to think about how willing we are to spend 3 hours with users. I don't think that's enough. We need to be with each other all the time in a bigger way. Finally, I would say, here's a strategy. Let's disclose everything. That black box there covers a prototype that I can't show you, of a service I can't tell you about, for an agency I cannot name. It's the public's work, right? And I was paid for with public money. But I can't show that to you. And that perpetuates the service not functioning the way it should. And it perpetuates a kind of fear around testing and around failure. You know, the government can't fail because the stakes are too high. But what does it mean that the government can't even talk about the fact that it might like to try to do something better? Because that means admitting that something is not already great. Great. So Chris from Luma was talking this morning in the workshop about moonshot problem statements. That you don't actually necessarily say that you have a reasonable goal. You have an unreasonable goal, and that pushes people. So probably I won't ever be able to disclose everything. But as a strategy, I'm going to try to push to disclose everything so that all of the work can be seen, so that hopefully that creates more pressure to deliver services that actually benefit people who need them the most. Thank you.